Making connections over 200 episodes won't be easy. Join me on this journey of conversation where I connect with those people that have gotten me this far so I can go even farther. This is the Dependent Independent Podcast, and this is a mini-sode.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you for downloading and listening to mini-sode 65 and a half of the Dependent Independent Podcast. I'm your host, Nick G., and this is a 200-episode podcast about making connections, looking back while moving forward. In these mini-sodes, you are just joined by me, and in our full episodes, you're joined by me and a guest. These shows post on midnight every Monday to hit your podcast feed. If this is the first time you're listening to the show, make sure whatever podcast app on iOS or Android you're listening to this show, make sure you hit subscribe, and that way our podcasts hit your feed so you can listen to it every Tuesday, no matter what you do. I appreciate you joining me on this mission to 200 episodes. I have a lot to talk about this crazy week that just happened, or weekend that happened. Life is finally kicking in. The school year started. My wife's back to work. Cool thing is, Megan, expanding her comfort zone. She is out at a nighttime yoga class, which is definitely not like her. She's usually an early bird, and she would be in bed by now. But I'm here right now coming to you live from the podcast studios here at the Dependent Independent Studios, I guess. And here we go. These shows post on YouTube, so if you don't like listening and you rather watch me go through this, feel free to check out our YouTube channel. The hyperlink is in the show notes, and everywhere else you can find this show are in the show notes too. So let's get started. This is a mini-sode. I like to keep these short. I appreciate you joining me, and for all those new listeners, welcome. So this past weekend, I guess, usually what I used to do is kind of get you caught up or remind you from our past episode if you haven't listened to it yet, but I'm assuming you already did. Let's say you did. I'm sure you enjoyed it. It was awesome. I had such a great time hanging out with Nick Bussett from the Gay Talk 2.0 podcast. He joined Megan and I. It was a lot of fun. But what I really want to talk to you about is this past weekend. So I've been doing this for like almost 3 years. And for some of you, you've been listening to me for all those 3 years. A lot of people actually go back and listen to the back catalog too, which you can find on iTunes and pretty much everywhere. So this past weekend, I attended my second podcast conference. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Podcast Conference. It happens here in South Jersey. I don't have a lot of time, I guess, to spare with my job and the kids and life happening to kind of shoot out to LA and to Chicago and DC or Orlando to go to most of the main podcast conferences that happen around the country. But this one is real convenient because it's only about 40 minutes away. And last year I attended the conference and was completely blown away. And I mean in the sense of completely overwhelmed with what I experienced, because me being a new podcaster, or some pseudo-nude, definitely not a nude podcaster, new podcaster back then, I attended this conference very naive. I thought that most podcasters out there were podcasters that just express themselves like I do, telling a story, hope to connect with my audience, those that are listening and anyone that's watching, and enjoying this journey, sharing my stories with all of you, and then connecting other people. It's pretty crazy how that works, how a lot of our fans that listen are actually connected now through all the social media, interweb stuff that we're connected to. And when I went, completely out of my element. Now, I don't do very well at networking events, even in my professional life. I don't look at them. I'm a terrible networker. And what I really wanted to talk about in this quick mini-sode is etiquette. Networking etiquette at conferences. I'm sure there's a lot of professionals listening to this, or anyone on here that has maybe been to a comic book convention, that there's a level of etiquette. But when you participate in it, it completely changes. Last year, I was an attendee. And I was there to learn about podcasting. I learned that people could make money with podcasting, that people could do podcasts about safe drinking water and water filters, like my friend Stefan Roots. You should check out his podcast, Dirty Water Guy, I think it is. And I'm sorry, Stefan, if I'm saying that wrong, but I want to make sure that my audience knows that. I'll put a hyperlink in the show notes so you guys can download his show. Oh, Dirty Water Dude, I think. Oh, crap. I'm totally drawing a blank. Stefan, I'm sorry. So, but it blew me away how there's this interesting variety of people that put their voice to mic like I do every week and talk about what they're passionate about. There's people that podcast about podcasters, people that podcast about a business they give to podcasters or services they give to podcasters. So I just listened. And I think I put a show a year ago and talked about how how overwhelming that was. Well, this year I decided to completely go out of my comfort zone and sign up to speak at this conference. Now, I did a presentation, and it was through an 8-minute window. It was like speed presenting this past Friday, and I had 8 minutes, and my subject was authenticity and creativity. Now, I'm not going to get into it, and I think what I really need to do is work on that because I did a lot in 8 minutes. I'd love to see what I can do in 30 minutes, but I'll save that for another show. When I attended this thing, not only a day before, which was great too, because now I really immersed myself. Since the last time I was at this podcast conference, I made a lot of friends. And you guys know this. You know this about me. I have to build relationships with people. That's what this whole thing is all about. It can't be superficial. If you've listened to past few shows, I really identified that truly is something I'm shooting for. And I was able to hang out with several friends. I consider them friends first and podcasters second. Annette Bone from the Dancepreneuring podcast. She's been on my show before. She's awesome. Anthony Hayes, who's going to be on episode 66, which we're going to record this weekend. It'll post next week on Monday at midnight, a week from tonight at midnight. And Joe Pardo, host of the Dreamers podcast, but he's actually the individual that organized the whole podcast conference. He's the reason why we got together. And I picked up Annette at the airport on Friday, left work early, then met Annette and Joe, or Anthony and Joe at the hotel. We went out to dinner. We went to Joe's house. We had ice cream and s'mores, and we sat out by the fire and talked, and it was way cooler and bigger than any conference you could go to. But not to diminish how much fun the conference was. So the next night, went to work, practiced my presentation with some people at work, and then I went on my way, had all my notes ready to go. And when I started my podcast presentation, or my presentation, Authenticity and Creativity, there's a lot of influencers in the room. There's a lot of people that were in that room that are highly reputable in the podcast universe. Again, me not knowing a lot, I met a few people last year when I attended, but this year, same thing. Almost celebrities to a celebrity status. And I'm assuming in any type of environment where like-minded people get together, there's always people that you aspire to be like. Now, as I did my presentation, I only had 8 minutes. So I didn't have an opportunity to really talk about me. I think I did a quick sentence about me, but I really wanted to get to the meat of it because I had some points to convey. And that maybe I learned that from my corporate world, that you really want to get to the point. Later on that weekend, when you think about etiquette, right? The etiquette at a podcast conference is you want to make people aware of what your podcast is. And it completely made me uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable to the extent that I couldn't promote myself, because I have no problem doing that, but I wanted to do it in kind of a tactful way, a subtle way. But in that whole thing with building relationships, I almost blow that rule of etiquette, right? You go to a podcast conference. These are some things I just kind of pulled that made an impact from this conference. I definitely enjoyed it and learned a lot from the people presenting, but like if you know me, I do a lot of self-reflection, and I had to look inside and figure out what I got most out of it. I realized that it was probably stupid. It was a dumb idea. I should have promoted the hell out of my show. There was an individual named Dave Jackson. He's enormously influential in the podcast community. He actually works for the company that I host this show on. And I met him later on that weekend. And this is just one instance where etiquette was out the window, where I really didn't have the best etiquette or have the best manners to really take advantage of what's expected at this conference. And I introduced myself to him. I said, "Hello, Dave." I didn't get a chance to really formally introduce myself. I host a show called the Dependent Independent Podcast. And I actually, even before I even said it, he said, "Yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation," which I was flattered. That was awesome. And he said, "Yeah, I noticed you never told anyone what your podcast was." Now, the funny thing is I didn't skip a beat because I thought that, well, it really wasn't the time to do it. But when I walked away, I actually had total regret that I didn't. I was an outsider. I chose to be an outsider at this, like kind of on the fringe. And I realized when you're around like-minded people that have been to other conferences, they are pretty tight. Someone stands up and asks a question, you have a whole group of people clapping for them that they know who they are. I guess I couldn't create that environment from my 8-minute presentation. I'd rather, part of me thought I could, I guess. Maybe that was a little naive. But when you think about etiquette at networking events, I think there's a level of, one, stepping way out of your comfort zone, which I thought I was trying to do when I presented. 2, making sure you're saying hi to everybody. And 3, there's a little bit of self-promotion. There's a little bit of letting people know what you're all about, whether you're providing a service or whether you're providing any type of product or anything, or you for that matter. But one thing I have to really work on that I really wanted to share with you guys is working on my networking etiquette. I attend networking conferences or networking events for my job with a lot of HR people, human resources people. And there's a lot of people where they and I don't know if to me it feels superficial, but there's a lot of looking down at name tags, then looking up, making eye contact. And I don't do well with trying to meet a lot of people. And I was glad to be able to go into this conference knowing that I knew Annette and Joe and Anthony. That really made it feel like something more than just 2 days learning about podcasting. But that's how I'm wired. I mean, that's exactly, it's funny. Like, you don't want to be, and that's what I did. There was a lot of people that talked about authenticity, me being one of them, about authenticity and creativity. But the one thing I struggle with is I want to take advantage of what everyone gets, but because I'm who I am, it limits me from that, right? Because I built these tight relationships and only spent time with these small people, I didn't create connections or relationships with everybody, but it's exhausting. It's so exhausting to do that. I don't know how anybody does it. The cool thing is I was approached by some people that heard my presentation that wanted to talk to me, and that was valuable, and that felt good, and that was manageable for me. So for 2 days, nearly 16 hours. I mean, we were there a long time, or 15 hours between the 2 days. I built pretty good relationships, and now what happens is, or what I consider the start of relationships, because I don't believe relationships happen at just a simple networking event, and maybe that's why I don't put so much energy into it, because I'm afraid it's just going to fizzle away. You know this. If you listen to the show, you get it. If you're part of our community and you get it. If you connected with somebody from the show, you get it. It's something that I'm going to have to work on, and I wish I had some type of call to action to you guys listening. What I can ask you is weigh out when you're with people, and if you feel that you have to take some necessary steps to step out of your comfort zone to get the most out of it, push yourself past where I pushed myself. There was one point I kind of gave up, and it's not that I regret it, but I should have took an active approach. Even when you think of etiquette, right, ways to behave, there was even a time when I'm a goofball, man, and the fact that they did skits, I must have been the only one in the room that didn't volunteer to do a skit where people grab a piece of paper, for a group of 4, they're required to come up with a theme song, a title, and do a 5-minute podcast with the 4 people in the team. And in this year, Joe is it's pretty sweet. Last year he did an object where they took an object. This year, Joe Pardo, the gentleman who ran the conference, had 6 words on a piece of paper. And my God, these guys were so creative and had so much fun. But me, I was just completely on the fringe. I did my presentation on Friday, and all I did was listen. I don't know if maybe listening I got more out of it. But again, I got to a point where I was intimidated. Again, I couldn't imagine going to a national conference. I don't know if I can handle it. But I could say, one thing I could say I really pulled from it is I actually started relationships. I actually took the time to soak in people that wanted to make a true connection with me. And I think that's way more important than how many business cards. And again, I don't even bring business cards. Everybody else has podcast business cards. I don't have any. Again, terrible etiquette for networking. You're supposed to hand out business cards. You're supposed to make sure everyone knows who you are. I didn't even talk about my podcast during my own presentation, which is crazy. I didn't do any self-promoting. Excuse me. I had a drink of water. Jeez. Some people are masters at that. You had people that came out that were fully garbed out with their own logos and everything. Maybe if I ask you that, in listening to this show, I could use some advice for my listeners. If you feel that that's a good thing, go ahead and find me on social media. The links are in the show notes. Shoot me a message and tell me if that makes sense. If not, if I'm an idiot, tell me anyway. I'd love to hear it. I'd love for you to tell me, because this is one of those things where I soaked it all in, and I'm just reaching out to the Dependent Independent podcast community for advice. I don't think I'm going to change. I don't think I'm going to ever be the person that's shaking hands with everybody. I tried a couple times. I mean, I'm the guy who finds one person at a conference, shares everything with them, eats lunch with them, goes to all the breakout sessions, if it be an educational conference. Here we didn't have breakout sessions. They actually had people that presented. But these are the folks, maybe those are the folks that I stepped out to grab some fresh air with while the conference was going on. For all of you that are listening to this show for the first time that I met at the conference, I want to thank you. People like Scott and Raph and Clay and Dave, and I know Annette and Joe and Anthony and Jordan, and all these people that I connected with, that I will have an opportunity to profile your podcasts on our full episodes, because we have this little segment called Are You Listening? I think you should, and I will definitely take every opportunity to promote your podcast. I didn't want to do this because this is a mini-sode, and we're stretching this almost, I guess, 20 minutes. I like to keep these a little short, but I wanted to take as much time as I could to really get that out on etiquette, that I never thought that there is a specific etiquette after being at professional and extracurricular conferences that I just don't seem to follow. I guess I'm a rule breaker. I guess I'm horrible. I have horrible manners, let's say. But I guess from living and knowing myself and being self-aware, it is way more cooler to connect with people on a personal level and grow from there than zipping through a conference and shaking hands and kissing babies. And not to diminish anyone who does that, and that's awesome. But I was able to watch that from a distance and constantly, just like I did last year, go, holy cow, that is some intense shit to do that. And I commend anyone who does that, I guess it might hold me back. It might keep me from getting my message out there. But the one thing I know that when this show, when we hit 200 episodes, I'll be friends with these people, and the show will go away. It'll go on a shelf, and that's what it's really about. This is just simply a vehicle to make connections with everybody and have opportunities to go to the podcast conference. And what an honor to speak. What a great honor to speak. And we'll get our photographs. There's an individual, and her name escapes me, Jeanette, I think her name is, that took photographs with Joe or for Joe at the conference. Unbelievably professional looking photographs. I hope she doesn't mind I take one and throw it on my website. But it was an amazing experience. I suggest anyone, hey, all right, not only am I asking for feedback, but here's what I want you to do. If you ever have an opportunity to talk to people that are passionate about what you're passionate about, take the opportunity to do it. As much as I was nervous doing that presentation, I really felt at home talking about what I was talking about, like really felt at home. It was a blur. It was 8 minutes. Soon enough, they'll put it online, and I'll be able to share it with family and friends, and they can watch it. I'm not going to watch it, just like I don't listen to the show. But it was awesome, and it was exhilarating. And I was glad that a couple of people came up to me afterwards and said, we really liked your presentation. That was flattering. That's what made it pretty awesome. And I do appreciate everyone who presented and did unbelievable, those that gave me feedback, that Harry, who was awesome, Harry Duran from Podcast Junkies, who in the middle of it, I'm sitting on my laptop in the back, and he's shooting me feedback through Facebook Messenger, which was awesome. A little tough love he was giving me. So I'm tweaking a few things on my show. And because this is an art, this is a craft, this is something we do, we want to get better at it. And that's what I'm doing. So all in all, make sure you know wherever you are what the proper etiquette is, and you choose what you want to do. Do you want to follow the rules and do what everyone does or thinks you should be, or supposedly what you should be doing? Or do you want to go on the fringe and choose to do what you want to do? Because maybe that's what you'd rather do. This is Nick G., the host of the Dependent Independent podcast. Check the show notes. You can download, subscribe this show. I know you're listening to it now, and the best thing I can ask you to do is not only subscribe, but go rate the show on iTunes. I love feeling good about myself, whether positive or negative, so please give me feedback. I asked you for feedback on, was it the right thing or the wrong thing? Direct message me. Find me on Facebook. The links are in our show notes. Continue to listen to the show. I appreciate you listening to the show and taking time out of your day to listen. It's mini-sode 65 and a half. Oh, and by the way, we have a live show for those local to South South Jersey, but we'll start doing our promotions and our event postings on Facebook, where you can come join us at the Vinyl Brewing in Hamilton, New Jersey, the small town where I live. Their grand open is later on at the end of September, but we're going to be doing a live show Columbus Day weekend, me and Jess Brannis from Drinks with Jess, a dear good friend of mine. I can't wait to hang out with her again. And if you're lucky and you have a tattoo and a good story behind it, you may have an opportunity to get on the mic and be part of this show. This is Nick G. I think I already went through that, and you already know who that is. Thanks for listening, and I am out.